Hello everyone and welcome to a video where I will do something I don't usually do. I will show both classical games that finished as they finished within a minute of one another, so it'd be silly making two videos. I know some of you don't enjoy it when I make two games in one video, but you know, they literally finished within a minute of each other. So the first game we're showing is Gukesh versus Wei Yi, and all of them are very, very important for the standings, so I hope you don't mind. And also the second one is, of course, Magnus Carlsen versus Fabiano Caruana. I'm showing this one first as it finished first. So let's dive straight into it. Gukesh, classical world champion versus Wei Yi. Gukesh opens with pawn to e4. And we have, I would say, fireworks right from the start. We have pawn to e5, knight f3, knight to f6. Wei Yi opts for the Petrov's defense. Knight captures on e5 and this d6. This is the classical variation, a very standard stuff. Knight f3, knight captures on e4. And now d4 is the most played move here in the classical variation, but we have knight to c3. This is the so-called Nimzovich attack versus the Petrov. And it is definitely my favorite, allows for a really, really open game, and you really get to use those bishops. So knight captures on c3, we have d captures, one of the rare cases where you will see captures away from the center, as of course everyone is taught when they're a beginner, you should capture towards the center, so you improve your center, but here both of the bishops get access to the game. This is a compensation more than enough. Bishop to e7, we have bishop to e3, and now castle's kingside. And again, very, very standard position, queen to d2, bishop to c3, the bishop to d3, those are very, very standard developing ideas. But Gukesh goes for queen to d3, which is very, very rare. Only a handful of games, and I imagine it's some sort of a deep preparation that he's been, sitting on, as unleashing it like this with an hour and 59 minutes on the clock against Wei Yi, who basically prepared the Petrov. There's no way Gukesh could have known that Wei Yi will play the Petrov. Queen d3, I think already at this point Wei Yi knew that he was in for a wild ride, because if you check queen d3 with an engine, the engine will say it's an inaccuracy. So, not something you would expect from a world champion, but if it works, if it doesn't lose, it's definitely a surprise. So, knight to d7. Okay, nicely continuing the game. The queen is on d3, so you want to have access to that queen. Next move, you're just going to win a tempo. Castle's queenside by Gukesh, and now knight to c5. And there are a couple of games where c6 was played, knight to c5 is a new move, so now already as of move 9, we have a completely new game. Queen to c4, sort of inviting bishop to e6, and that's exactly what Wei Yi does. There's nothing wrong with that. And queen to f4. So Gukesh playing very, very interesting chess here. First an inaccuracy, and then he just, continues making moves with the queen. And you know what they say, if you've ever seen Searching for Bobby Fischer, the movie, don't bring your queen out too early. It's one of the, chess's oldest principles. But if you're a world champion, you are, of course, welcome and expected to break those principles. We have pawn to d5, grabbing the center. If your opponent allows it, you should always do it. Knight to d4, beautiful square for the knight. And bishop to d6, challenges the queen. Again, Gukesh moves the queen, and queen to d7, just nicely developing, connecting rooks. And of course, Wei Yi can only be very, very happy with his position. There is, after all, nothing wrong with it, except maybe Gukesh knows a little bit more about it. But time-wise, they are now equal, almost equal. So, obviously Gukesh also out of his preparation. We have pawn to h3. The castles are on opposite sides of the board, so it's of course going to be a race. Gukesh will be pushing on the king side, Wei Yi will be pushing on the queen side, and c6. Okay, we have pawn to g4, and now you could expect something like rook to a8, or starting an advancement on the queen side. But no, we have pawn to f5. Wei Yi just boldly opens up the position. We have g5. Gukesh says, nope, we're going to keep that f file closed. There is a rook on the f file after all. And pawn to f4. We have bishop to d2, and now rook 8 to e8. Also, knight to e4 doesn't look that bad, because after, let's say, knight captures and queen captures, and let's say Gukesh continues attacking on the king side, because that's what he is doing. Bishop c5 could be somewhat annoying, and then let's say bishop to e1 defends the f2 pawn, then you continue pushing, pawn to b5. So, okay, it's a race, bishop d3, then you continue pushing with those pawns. Definitely can be played. But okay, rook 8 to e8, we have rook to g1, and now bishop to f5. Very, very nasty pressure along this diagonal. So, of course, Wei Yi is expecting Gukesh to capture on f5, and knight captures on f5. We have queen captures and pawn to c4, putting pressure on that center. We have knight to e4, now attacking the bishop and the f2 pawn again, preparing that bishop to c5. It will come at some point. Bishop to d3, and this is what's funny about this line. Usually bishop to d3 is one of the first moves you play after you play d captures on c4, but now it's played on move 21, which is, I mean, very, very cool. We have queen to e5, getting the queen off of this mask, and now rook d to e1. Interestingly, if you continue pushing something like pawn to h4 here, then this bishop to a3 move is a very, very powerful resource for Wei Yi, just threatening mate in 1. Of course, if you capture, it's again mate in 1. So yeah, that would be very annoying. You could play pawn to c3, but then knight captures on d2, and okay, black is perfectly fine. So after queen e5, Gukesh finds this very, very interesting rook d to e1, which seems to allow bishop to a3 again. But now you will simply play c3, and after, let's say, bishop to c5, putting pressure on that f2 pawn, you'll play c captures on d5, and after captures, you're just going to go rook e2. And this is now an issue, as you will just double up and enjoy a great game. But something similar happened in the game without bishop to a3. Here, bishop to c5 was played, c captures on d5, c captures on rook to e2, and now, okay, Wei Yi did everything correctly. He just needs to start pushing on the queen side. That's it. Even a pawn sacrifice with pawn to b5 could go a long way. You know, if you capture, then just rook to b8, and I don't know, something like a4, a6, you can even give up another pawn. You can't really, because queen captures on b2 will just be very nasty. So after rook e2, instead of doing that, Wei Yi played knight captures on d2. He offered a queen trade, a queen for a queen, but he missed something. And I could ask you to pause the video here, but you would never, you know, in a million years see what he missed. Of course, everyone sees that you can just give a check and reposition your queen, and then maybe you can win the black queen. The problem is, of course, after captures on h7, which was played in the game, we will not capture and allow this check. We just played king to h8, and now rook captures on d2. Okay, king captures on h7, now it can be played. Rook captures on d5. We have queen to e2, offering a queen trade, and now there is a move that can be played that completely ruins Wei Yi's position, and I'm pretty sure you see what it is. You know, just for fun, you know, take a few seconds for yourselves. So if you trade right away, captures, and let's say rook captures on c5, rook captures on f2, there's a passed f pawn. If we prefer anyone here, it's definitely black. So instead, after queen e2, g6 with check. And now if you go up the board, let's say king to h6, look at this, rook h5 is checkmate. Beautifully, beautiful. The other rook, of course, guards the g6 pawn. So after g6, we have king to g8, and now queen to b3. The only move that allows Gukesh to fight for the win. And here, Wei Yi drops sort of the pieces, you know. He plays bishop to e3, which is fine. It's just not the only way that you can maybe survive. The only way you can maybe survive is rook e3. And rook e3 is incredibly powerful because, of course, if you capture, then queen captures on e3 check, and queens get traded off, and then bishop captures, and you lose the rook on g1. So obviously, you will not play that. So after rook to e3, what you would have to do is play pawn to c3, and then you would just go king h8. And it still looks very, very nice. Rook captures on c5, but now you have rook to g3. And you have to find even rook g3 with all of this, as this is the only way to draw. And now you cannot capture, otherwise this pawn becomes very strong, and also the f file opens up for the rook. And then something like rook to d1, you are going to play rook captures on g6, eliminate this very, very strong pawn. And then again, with something maybe like queen b6, you can put a lot of pressure on black's position, but the game goes on. That's the point. However, Wei Yi misses rook to e3. He plays bishop to e3 with check, and now Gukesh just moves the king to b1. And he says, okay, I'm going to capture your bishop maybe on the next move. King h8, Wei Yi unpins from this long diagonal, and now f captures on e3 by Gukesh, which is the best way to play. There was a lot of talk about something like pawn to a3, you know, just freeing up the a2 square for the white king, but then you allow bishop captures on f2, and after, let's say, rook g to g5, which you can't just play rook to h5, the queen is covering that, so you need to double up. There's this queen e1 check, king a2, and now queen to e6, where after you give a check, you can just move the king, and there are no discoveries, because once you move the rook, you just trade with check. So after king to h8, f captures on e3, the most precise way for Gukesh to play. We have rook captures on e3, again looks very strong, as you are attacking the queen and also threatening, maybe queen to e1 in some lines. Here, okay, not really, because you can always bring the rook back, but queen b4, moving the queen with tempo while defending the e1 square twice. So that is the absolute best Gukesh can do. Rook to c8, putting pressure on the c2 pawn, and rook to c1. We have rook to e4, attacking Gukesh's queen, and queen to a5. Again, fighting for that h5 square, and now not a lot of things for Wei Yi to do. He goes king to g8 and pawn to b3. Now Gukesh's position is just so much better, he can even sort of invest time in king safety. He plays pawn to b3. We have rook e back to e8. Now he also has to defend, and now queen captures on a7. So just grabbing another pawn, nothing really happening here. We have queen to e6, putting pressure on the rook, and queen to d4, nicely defending. And we have pawn to f3. Here you could also trade captures, but you're always going to be down 2 pawns. And, in the long run, of course, Gukesh will win this. So Wei Yi goes all for nothing. Pawn to f3. He has a passed pawn. He decides to advance it. We have rook to g5. Gukesh says, all right, you go after your f-pawn. I'm just going to defend my g-pawn, go queen h4, queen h7, and that will be pretty much it. So here we have queen to e4. The problem is if you go queen to e2 to start advancing the pawn, then queen h4, and after f2, there's rook f5, just taking away the f8 square from the king, and of course f1 queen to h7 will be checkmate. So after rook g5, queen to e4 was played, trying to trade off queens, and there's only one good move for Gukesh here, and he finds it, as do you guys. He played queen captures on e4, rook captures on e4, and now, not to spoil it all the way, he played one more move, after which Wei Yi resigned. Which move did he play? Have at it. Only one move wins here. That is correct. Rook to f5. Rooks belong behind passed pawns, and this is a rook, this is a passed pawn, so obviously very, very simple move to find. But, you could also very easily make a mistake. You cannot allow rook to f8. Now, there's really not much you can do. If you want to save the pawn, you have to play a passive move like rook e3, or you trade off this rook, let's say captures, then rook to f1, rook to f4. Okay, you defended, but, nothing really happening here. White is still up 2 pawns. It's a completely winning position. And yes, the king can win the g6 pawn, but by the time the black king does that, you're also going to bring your king over to e3. Let's say king f6, king d2, king captures, king goes to e3. And next move, whatever black plays, doesn't really matter. You're going to capture on f3. Still, you're up 2 pawns, and still you are completely winning. So yeah, beautifully played by Gukesh. Like I said, I'm a big fan of this line. I played myself, but I've never actually seen the queen to d3 move. It's the special world champion touch, queen to d3, the so-called we could even call it the Gukesh line. Very nicely done. Takes down Wei Yi, and Wei Yi really wanted to take him into the deep dark forest, but it's very, very hard. Gukesh is 18 years old, and, he seems to really be finding his way when taken into the deep, dark forest. So yeah, like I said, we're gonna also show the Magnus versus Fabi game. So let me just switch that up. Yeah, let's check it out. This game also very, very interesting because Magnus chooses a line in the Catalan where you just give up a pawn seemingly for nothing, but, as usual, for a lot of activity. It's a line that Danil Dubov, who was, of course, Magnus's second, plays quite a lot. He plays it even in Classical. And even online, there is a blitz game where Danil Dubov defeated Magnus Carlsen in this line where Danil played white. So let's check out this very exotic line. D4, we have D5, pawn to C4, pawn to E6, and pawn to g3, preparing for the Catalan setup. Knight f6, we have bishop to g2, bishop to e7, we are now in the closed Catalan, knight to f3, castles, castles, still all theory, nothing new here. D captures, queen to c2, preparing to recapture, or so you'd think, because everyone plays it. Pawn to a6, and now captures, or even pawn to a4, even more played. Pawn to a4, the most popular move, queen captures the second, and then once the queen is challenged, you bring the queen back to c2. But here, rook to d1. It's sort of like a slap in the face move, like in the previous game that we've just seen. Rook d1 is deemed as an inaccuracy by the engine, but it is exactly those inaccurate moves that we love seeing, wielded by such incredible players like Magnus, Carlsen, and Daniil Dubov. b5. Okay, Fabi defends it, and now knight to e5, going after the rook on a8. So knight to d5, you have to stop it, and b3. Magnus challenges the pawn structure. C captures on b3. Fabi says, all right, I will take your pawn. A captures, and bishop to b7. Nicely developing. We have bishop to a3 by Magnus. And there are some games where bishop captures on a3 was played. Here we have bishop to d6, and now knight to d3. And here there are a couple of games where b4 was played. Also knight to c6 is a known move, but here we have knight to d7 by Fabi, and it is now as of move 13 that we have a completely new game. So let's see what Magnus had in mind. Okay, pawn to e4. He has the f4 and b4 squares covered, so the knight can only go back. And if you go to f6, of course, e5 will be played, so you're going to have to capture on a3 at some point, or maybe you want to go, okay, to b6, also possible. But Fabi does capture on a3. Rook captures, not knight captures, rook captures. Knight captures would be weird. The knight has no squares here. And this way you can just develop the knight and double up nicely on the a-file, put more pressure on that a6 pawn, which kind of forces the rook to remain on a8, which kind of exposes it to the Catalan bishop on g2. So this is all something that, of course, Magnus knows very well, and you can see by the situation on the clock that he is, I would say well within his preparation. We have knight 5 back to f6, and knight to d2. Nicely developing. We have pawn to a5, and rook d to a1. Now just challenging the pawn, and time to introduce another defender of the pawn. Pawn to c5, and you also get to play it by advancing the c pawn, so Fabi really gets rid of all of his weaknesses. We have d captures on c5, queen to c7, and now pawn to b4. We have a captures on b4, rook captures on a8, rook captures, but now Magnus doesn't trade. Instead, he goes rook to c1. It's going to be Magnus's c-pawn versus Fabi's b-pawn. But Magnus's c-pawn is incredibly defended, or rather defended incredibly well. Whereas for Fabi, it's not going to be easy to defend those b-pawns. We have rook to c8, knight to b8 instead of rook to c8, also very interesting, having access to that c6 square. But okay, you also move the rook from this diagonal, so it works. Queen to b2, Magnus says, all right, now I'm ready to start collecting. Pawn to h6, there's no way for Fabi to stop that. And queen captures on b4. We have bishop to c6, nicely blockading, but Magnus just frees up the b4 square. We have queen to b2, and now the knight coming to b4. So as you can see, in all of the openings, even in Catalan, everything, comes down to the b4 square. We have rook to a8, and now knight to b4. There's no way to move the bishop. If you move the bishop, c6 just wins the game on the spot. So Fabi has to allow knight captures on c6. We have knight to e5 and pawn to f4 first. Magnus grabs more space before getting rid of the bishop on c6. Knight to c4 by Fabi, and now knight captures on c4. Fabi even gives up a pawn just to stabilize the position a little bit. We have captures, and not captures, knight captures on c6 first. Queen captures, and the rook captures on c4. And now if you count the pawns, Magnus is actually up a pawn. So this is again one of those moments of converting mind to matter or rather energy to matter in chess, where you start off by giving up material to have more space or more resources, and then you just trade that space and resources to gain more material. But here in Magnus's case, he keeps the space, he keeps everything, he just gains more material. He's Magnus. So, okay, we have queen back to rook to c8, doubling up here, putting pressure on the c5 pawn. You really prefer that pawn to be on c5 rather than c6. On c6, if it's going to be defended by the bishop, that's going to be really bad. So, pawn to e5. Looks like a move you maybe don't want to play right away because, yes, it seems like you're winning a piece, but not really, as the knight will block with knight to d5. And why would you do this? Now the pawn remains on a dark square, the bishop is blocked, so why did Magnus do this? Well, he did it to play pawn to f5. I mean, just beautifully played. Now, of course, you cannot capture, otherwise this diagonal opens up. Not only that, if you capture queen to d4, and you can just resign the game. The knight is hanging, for example, rook to d8. Now you're just going to go rook to c2. There's no time for black. You're just going to attack the knight again, and that's it. Or, you know, if something, you know, maybe black spots something, you can even go for some other ideas. The queen cannot move, otherwise you just start advancing, so black is completely tied up here. So that's why after f5, queen to a6 by Fabi, and now you'd expect maybe a move like pawn to f6 to sort of break black's defenses, but the white rook is hanging, so you have to tend to that first. Rook back to c1, and now queen to a7. Putting pressure on that c5 pawn. Magnus captures on e6 once, we have f captures, and now even bishop captures on d5. And this is, at least to me, this is a very, very scary moment when playing, you know, against someone who has the strong Catalan bishop once they give it up for the knight. You know that's not going to end well. Even though objectively this can still be played, it's going to be very, very hard. E captures and queen to d4. A beautiful centralizing move by Magnus. He blocks Fabi's pass pawn, and now he has two pass pawns of his own that he will push. We have queen to d7, controlling both c6 and e6, and also keeping an eye on the d5 pawn, and king g2. Just improving the position a little bit. You never know when it's going to become a king and pawn endgame, so we want to have your king as close to the action as possible. Queen to c6 just blockading, and pawn to h4 was played. King to h8, we have rook to c2, and Fabi just goes king to g8. Magnus plays pawn to h5, we have king to h8, and now king to h3. We have king to g8, Fabi just repeating, there's nothing that he can do. He can either, you know, wait for Magnus to accept a draw, or for Magnus to overpush, and then what happens, happens. King back to h2, and now there was even an interview with Hikaru. He was talking about his own game, and then he checked out the position on Magnus versus Fabi board, and he said, like, what is Fabi thinking about it? Just move the king back and forth, and that's it. But, and Hikaru also said that there was only one tactic here for Magnus. Okay, he is pushing, but the tactic is to get Fabi lower on time, because you're not going to beat Fabi if he has 16 minutes on the clock. So somehow Magnus needs to play some weird moves that allow the game to, you know, continue endlessly for Fabi to burn more time, and then maybe Fabi blunders. And okay, Fabi starts queen to e6. Not a blunder, just not king to h8. So he's showing that he, you know, will play other moves. And the engine gives pawn to g4, but that's very committing. Magnus still waits before executing pawn to g4. He plays rook to d2. Rook to d8, now you have to defend the pawn, and king to g2. We have queen to c6, Fabi repeats, and rook to d1. Queen to a6 by Fabi, and Magnus goes rook to e1. We have queen to e6, blocking the e-pawn, and now rook to b1. And here, Magnus sort of caught Fabi. He allows queen to f5, which comes as a double attack on the rook and on the pawn. So Fabi goes for it. He should just move the king back and forth. That's it. But he played queen to f5, and now Magnus played rook to b2. Again, seemingly doing nothing, but Fabi can grab a full pawn here. And as you can see, he already dropped from 14 minutes to sort of 11 minutes, and he captured the pawn. And he spent so much time calculating. He already dropped to 4 minutes, and it's a losing move. But you have to, you know, I don't know if it's even possible, you know, from that position where Fabi captured to calculate all of this, but Magnus plays it correctly. He plays pawn to c6, which is, okay, a move everyone plays, but the next move is difficult. Fabi plays king to h7, and now there's only one move that wins the game, probably the one that Fabi miscalculated. Feel free to pause the video and win the game for Magnus, while I give you a couple of seconds. The move, of course, is not pawn to c7. It's pawn to e6. This is the only move that wins the game. The reason pawn to c7 is it's premature. You will just block it, and now you're not in time. For example, now pawn to e6, you can just play rook captures on c7, and that pawn is useless. And if you try to bring more firepower, let's say you defend the pawn, all of a sudden queen f7, there's no e6. And now, let's say queen to b6, you go, you defend the pawn, okay. Queen to f5, puts pressure on the rook, puts pressure on the pawn, and that's all there is. Rook to c1, queen to e4 with check, king h2, and now you even enter some perpetual action, and there's no more way for you to win. With pawn to e6, you're still very flexible. e7 can be played, c7 can be played, and black cannot account for both. So Fabi played queen to g6, went after the pawn, and now just rook to e2. Beautifully defended past pawn on e6. We have rook to a8, queen captures on d5. There's no move for Fabi here. Rook to a3, one last attempt at maybe swindling the game, but Magnus just played a queen to e4. He forces a queen trade, and he was in this position on move 52 that Fabiano Caruana resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. So Magnus also wins in classical, and what does this mean for our standings? Well, I will show you, but first let's see why you resign, because after captures and captures, you cannot stop both pawns. You can stop this one, for example, e7, rook d8, but then just c7, and you just give up one pawn, you queen the other one, you have to give up the rook, captures, and of course, yeah, white is winning here. Queen e4, Fabi resigns, and a beautiful, beautiful victory for Magnus Carlsen. And what does this mean for the standings? Let's check it out. Sorry, these are the previous standings. I have them prepared somewhere. No, I thought I prepared them, but okay, I will just tell you the standings. So what this means for the standings is that now Magnus is in the lead. He's in first place, 15 points. Gukesh second place, 14.5 points. Hikaru third place, as he has defeated Arjun in Armageddon today, with 13 points. Fabiano with 12.5 points, which is kind of crazy, as going into this round, Fabiano was leading the event. Fabi had 12.5, Magnus had 12. But yeah, a loss will do that. Arjun 11.5, and Wei Yi last place currently with 8 points. And tomorrow we have the final matchup, as you can see, round 10. Arjun versus Magnus. Magnus will have the black pieces against Arjun. Fabiano versus Gukesh. Gukesh will have the black pieces against Fabi. And Wei Yi versus Hikaru. Hikaru will have the black pieces against Wei Yi. So I would say anything is still possible. Magnus can definitely win, as he's leading the tournament. Gukesh can definitely win. He's only half point behind Magnus. And Hikaru, I believe he can also win a winning classical over Wei Yi with black, who's not having the best tournament. Will propel Hikaru to 16 points, which means that Magnus has to lose in classical, or maybe he can draw, which also gets him to 16, and then whatever happens in Armageddon. And yeah, so yeah, let's say Arjun beats Magnus, Fabiano beats Gukesh, and Hikaru wins Wei Yi. Hikaru can also be first, and Fabiano. Can Fabiano be first? I would say yes. Yes, he's on 12.5. If he wins, if he beats Gukesh in classical, and Hikaru and Magnus lose, then Fabiano finishes on 15.5. So final round, anything can happen. Magnus, Gukesh, Hikaru, and Fabi can still claim first place. It's gonna be wild. So hope you're ready for that. Yeah, sorry about that. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I would like to thank Carlos Salinas, London Initiative for Safe AI, Ricardo Paulin, and Richard Schwartz for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.